The eviction notice stared back at me from the kitchen table like a death sentence. 30 days. That's all I had left before I'd be sleeping in my Honda Civic, assuming they didn't repossess that too. I pushed aside the stack of unpaid bills and reached for my lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste matching my mood perfectly. 3 months unemployed, 3 months of rejection emails, ghost interviews, and watching my savings disappear into the void of Dallas rent and utilities. My engineering degree might as well have been toilet paper for all the good it was doing me now. The knock at my apartment door made me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. Hell, I'd been avoiding everyone since the unemployment ran out. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a crisp business suit holding a manila envelope. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Sarah Henderson from Henderson & Associates law firm. I have some documents that require your signature." I opened the door, confusion replacing my morning dread. "I think you have the wrong guy. I can't afford a lawyer." She smiled professionally. "This concerns an inheritance, Mr. Morrison. May I come in?" Inheritance. The word felt foreign in my mouth. My parents had died in a car accident when I was 12, leaving me with nothing but debt and a foster care shuffle. My grandmother on my mother's side had passed when I was in college, but she'd had nothing to leave. "I'm sorry, but there's been a mistake. I don't have any wealthy relatives. Your grandfather, Thomas Morrison, passed away 6 weeks ago in Cedar Hollow, Texas. You're his sole heir." The name hit me like a physical blow. Thomas Morrison, my father's father, the man who'd never acknowledged my existence after my parents died. I'd sent him a letter once when I was 16, reaching out to my only living relative. He'd never responded. I stepped back, letting her enter my cramped apartment. She placed the envelope on my kitchen table, right next to the eviction notice. "Mr. Morrison, your grandfather was very specific about the terms. The ranch is yours free and clear, but there are conditions outlined in his personal letter." Ranch. The word conjured images of vast Texas landscapes, cattle, and a life so far removed from my concrete existence that it felt like fantasy. How much land are we talking about? 400 acres. Cattle operation. The property taxes are current, and there's a small savings account to cover immediate expenses. She paused, studying my face. "He also left specific instructions about your transition to rural life." I signed the papers in a daze, my signature shaky with disbelief. After she left, I sat staring at the inheritance documents. Thomas Morrison Ranch, Cedar Hollow, Texas. Population 340, according to the tiny print on the deed. 400 acres, my own land. No landlord, no eviction notices, no neighbors complaining about noise through paper-thin walls. It was like winning the lottery, except the benefactor was a ghost from my past who'd ignored me for 15 years. I packed everything I owned into 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box. It didn't take long. My furniture was garage sale quality, and I'd already sold my TV and gaming console to pay for groceries. The Honda's gas tank was nearly empty, but I had enough for the drive to Cedar Hollow. The drive south on I-35 felt like traveling backward through time. Dallas's urban sprawl gradually gave way to smaller towns, then farmland, then endless stretches of Texas countryside that seemed to swallow the horizon. My phone's GPS signal flickered in and out as I left the interstate for increasingly rural highways. 4 hours into the drive, I passed a sun-bleached sign. Cedar Hollow, Pop, 340, founded 1892. The town consisted of a single main street, lined with brick buildings that looked like they'd been frozen in the 1950s. A diner with a hand-painted sign, a hardware store, a veterinary clinic, and a small church with a white steeple. I drove through town in less than 2 minutes. The ranch sat 3 miles outside town, marked by a weathered wooden sign reading Morrison Ranch, established, 1934. A dirt road wound through mesquite trees toward a cluster of buildings, a 2-story farmhouse, a red barn, and several outbuildings. Cattle dotted the pastures, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. I parked beside the house and stepped out into the oppressive Texas heat. The silence was overwhelming. No traffic, no sirens, no city sounds. Just the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through dry grass. The front door was unlocked, the key hanging from a hook beside the frame. Inside, the house was sparse but functional. Hardwood floors, simple furniture, and family photos I'd never seen before. My grandfather, at various ages, always wearing the same serious expression. A few pictures of my father as a young man, before I was born. On the kitchen table, I found a manila envelope with my name written in careful script. Inside was a handwritten letter on yellowed paper. "Rick, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and you've inherited more than just land. The ranch comes with responsibilities you won't understand yet. Follow these rules exactly, or you'll end up like the others who didn't listen. Don't think I'm just some paranoid old man. Every rule has a reason, paid for in blood. 1. Never go outside between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Stay inside, lock the doors. 2. Count the cattle every morning and evening. If any are missing, report it to Sheriff Martinez immediately. 3. Never eat meat that's been left out overnight, no matter how fresh it looks. 4. Salt the ground in circles around the house and barn every new moon. 5. If you hear scratching on the walls at night, don't investigate. It will pass. 6. Never open the door after dark unless the visitor can recite the Lord's Prayer word for word. 7. If you see lights in the pasture at night, don't follow them. 8. Keep a loaded shotgun by the front door. Rock salt shells, not lead. 9. Never cut down the old oak tree in the east pasture. It's sacred. I know how this sounds. You'll think I'm crazy. But this land has been in our family for almost a century because we learned to respect what was here before us. The people in town will help you if you let them. Trust Maria Santos and her daughter Elena. Sheriff Martinez knows the truth. Don't be too proud to listen. Thomas. I read the letter twice, then set it aside with a snort. 9 rules for living on a ranch, each one stranger than the last. Rock salt shells, sacred trees. It read like the ravings of a lonely old man who'd spent too many years isolated in the middle of nowhere. Still, I found the shotgun exactly where he'd said it would be, leaning against the wall beside the front door. The shells in the box beside it were indeed rock salt, not lead. Whatever my grandfather's mental state had been, he'd been consistent in his delusions. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property. The barn was well maintained, filled with hay bales and ranch equipment I didn't recognize. The cattle seemed healthy enough, though they kept their distance from me. I counted 43 head in the main pasture, making a mental note to keep track as the letter suggested, not because I believed in supernatural threats, but because missing cattle meant lost money. As evening approached, I made myself a simple dinner from canned goods I'd found in the pantry. The isolation was already getting to me. In Dallas, I'd been surrounded by the constant hum of urban life. Here, every sound seemed amplified, the settling of the old house, the distant calls of coyotes, the rustle of wind through the mesquite trees. Around midnight, I was lying in bed when I heard it, a soft, scratching sound coming from the exterior wall. My first thought was mice or some other small animal, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. Rule number 5 flashed through my mind. If you hear scratching on the walls at night, don't investigate. It will pass. I shook my head. The old man's paranoia was already getting to me. It was probably just a branch scraping against the siding in the wind. But when I looked out the window, the night was perfectly still. The scratching continued for nearly an hour before finally stopping. I lay awake until dawn, telling myself it was just my imagination working overtime in an unfamiliar place. The next morning, I walked around the house looking for evidence of whatever had made the noise. I found nothing, no scratches on the siding, no branches close enough to touch the walls, no animal tracks in the dust. But when I counted the cattle, I only found 42 head. My first instinct was to search the property, but something in my grandfather's letter nagged at me. If any are missing, report it to Sheriff Martinez immediately. It seemed like an overreaction for one missing cow, but I was in unfamiliar territory. Maybe there were rustlers in the area, or dangerous predators. I drove into Cedar Hollow, parking outside the diner with the hand-painted sign reading Maria's Place. Inside, the smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. A middle-aged Hispanic woman with graying hair and kind eyes approached my table. "You must be Rick Morrison," she said, setting down a cup of coffee without being asked. "I'm Maria Santos. Your grandfather mentioned you might come around someday. Word travels fast in a small town. Faster than you'd think. How are you settling in out there?" "Well enough, I suppose, though I seem to have lost a cow already." Her expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Lost how?" "I had 43 yesterday, 42 this morning. Is that normal around here?" Maria glanced around the diner, then leaned closer. "Sheriff Martinez is having breakfast in the back booth. You should talk to him." Sheriff Martinez was a lean man in his 50s, with weathered skin and sharp eyes. When Maria introduced us, he invited me to sit. "Missing cattle, huh? How long you been at the ranch?" "Just got here yesterday." "And you're following your grandfather's instructions?" The way he said it made me pause. "You mean the letter? With all those rules?" Thomas was a good man, practical. His rules weren't suggestions. Martinez pulled out a small notebook. "Tell me exactly when you noticed the cow was missing." I described my morning count, feeling increasingly foolish. One missing cow shouldn't warrant this level of attention. But Martinez took notes like I was reporting a serious crime. "You staying out there alone?" "For now. Why?" "Might want to consider having someone check on you, at least until you get used to the local customs." There was that phrase again. Local customs. As if following a dead man's paranoid rules was somehow normal in Cedar Hollow. After breakfast, I drove to the veterinary clinic I'd noticed the day before. The sign read, "Cedar Hollow Veterinary Services, Dr. Elena Santos, DVM. Santos, same last name as Maria." I pushed through the front door, setting off a small bell. The waiting room was empty except for a young woman behind the reception desk. She looked up from her paperwork, and I felt my breath catch. She was beautiful in an understated way. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, intelligent brown eyes, and the kind of natural confidence that came from knowing exactly who you were. When she smiled, I forgot why I'd come. "You must be Rick Morrison. Mom called and said you might stop by." "Elena Santos, I'm guessing. Guilty as charged. Mom said you're having some trouble with your livestock." I explained about the missing cow, feeling increasingly self-conscious under her direct gaze. She listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a pad. "Has anything else seemed unusual since you arrived? Besides inheriting a ranch from a grandfather I'd never met?" "Not really. Well, there was some scratching on the walls last night, but I figure it was just an animal." Something flickered across her face. Concern, maybe, or recognition. "What kind of scratching?" "Rhythmic, deliberate. But when I looked outside this morning, I couldn't find any evidence of what might have caused it." Elena set down her pen and studied me carefully. "Rick, I'm going to give you some advice, and I need you to listen carefully. Your grandfather's letter. Follow every word of it. Don't dismiss the rules as the ramblings of an old man, and don't try to be a hero." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means this place has its own way of doing things, traditions that might seem strange to someone from the city, but those traditions exist for good reasons." Before I could ask what she meant, the bell chimed again, and an elderly man entered. Elena's demeanor shifted back to professional pleasantness. "Rick, this is Doc Hernandez. He helps out with the larger animals when I need an extra pair of hands." Doc Hernandez was a small man with silver hair and gentle eyes. When Elena introduced me, his face lit up with recognition. "Thomas Morrison's grandson. He talked about you sometimes, said you were smart, stubborn like him. He paused, studying my face. You look like your father did at that age. You knew my father? Before he left for the big city, yes. Good man. Shame what happened. His expression grew somber. You planning to stay at the ranch? I'm considering it. Don't have much choice, really. Well, if you do decide to stick around, remember, we take care of our own here in Cedar Hollow. But that means following the unwritten rules, not just the laws. There it was again. Rules, customs, traditions. Everyone in this town seemed to speak in code, referring to things they expected me to understand without explanation. I spent the next 2 days settling into a routine. Morning and evening cattle counts, basic maintenance around the property, and long hours trying to make sense of my grandfather's records. The missing cow never turned up, but no others disappeared. The scratching returned the second night, lasting even longer than before. This time I was tempted to investigate, but something in Elena's warning kept me in bed. The third night was quiet. On my fourth day, I made a crucial mistake. I'd found a package of steaks in the refrigerator, apparently left by my grandfather before his death. They looked fresh enough, so I grilled one for dinner and left the rest on the counter, planning to cook them the next day. I woke up violently ill. Stomach cramps that doubled me over, fever and nausea that left me retching into the toilet for hours. It wasn't until I was recovering the next morning that I remembered Rule 3. Never eat meat that's been left out overnight, no matter how fresh it looks. As I sat on the bathroom floor, weak and dehydrated, I found myself thinking about my grandfather's letter with new respect. Maybe the rules weren't just paranoid rambling. Maybe there was something about this place, the climate, the local bacteria, the wildlife, that required precautions a city dweller wouldn't understand. That afternoon, feeling well enough to venture outside, I decided to walk the eastern boundary of the property. I wanted to see this supposedly sacred oak tree my grandfather had mentioned. I found it about half a mile from the house, standing alone in the middle of a small clearing. It was enormous, easily 100 years old, with a trunk thick enough that 3 people couldn't wrap their arms around it. But what struck me most was the way the other vegetation grew around it. Nothing else thrived in its immediate vicinity, as if the tree demanded its own space. As I circled the ancient oak, I noticed something odd in the dirt at its base. Tracks, large ones, with distinct claw marks that pressed deep into the earth. They were bigger than any dog print I'd ever seen, longer than a human hand, and they seemed to circle the tree like some kind of ritual had taken place there. I knelt down for a closer look, my skin prickling with unease. The tracks were fresh, no more than a day or 2 old. Whatever had made them was large, powerful, and unlike anything I could identify. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, I felt genuine fear. Not the rational concern of a city dweller adjusting to rural life, but something deeper and more primitive. The kind of fear that made ancient humans huddle around fires and avoid the dark. As I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, I realized my grandfather's rules were starting to make a terrible kind of sense. The tracks around the oak tree haunted my dreams for the next 2 nights. Day 6 dawned gray and overcast, with heavy clouds promising rain that never came. I'd been at the ranch almost a week now, and the initial novelty was wearing off, replaced by a growing unease I couldn't shake. After my morning cattle count, 42 head, still 1 missing, I decided to investigate those tracks more thoroughly. I grabbed a camera and measuring tape from my grandfather's tool collection and drove the ATV out to the oak tree. In daylight, with proper equipment, maybe I could make sense of what I'd found. The tracks were even more disturbing than I remembered. Using the measuring tape, I confirmed they were nearly 8 inches long with claw marks that pressed 3 inches deep into the hard-packed earth. No domestic animal made tracks like these. No wild animal I knew of either. I photographed everything from multiple angles, then followed the trail away from the tree. The tracks led toward the ranch house, stopping about 50 yards from the property line. It was as if whatever made them had been testing boundaries, seeing how close it could get. Back at the house, I spread the photos across the kitchen table next to my grandfather's letter. Rule 4 jumped out at me. Salt the ground in circles around the house and barn every new moon. I dismissed it as superstition, but looking at those tracks, I wondered if there was something to it after all. Still, salting the ground seemed ridiculous. What was I supposed to tell people? That I was following my dead grandfather's paranoid instructions? I had enough credibility issues as the city boy who'd inherited a ranch he knew nothing about. The sound of a truck engine interrupted my brooding. Through the window, I saw Elena's white veterinary pickup pulling into the yard. My pulse quickened as I watched her step out, her dark hair catching the morning light. "Morning, Rick," she called, approaching the house with a professional stride. "Thought I'd check on you. Mom mentioned you've been having some adjustment issues." I invited her in, grateful for the company. "Just trying to figure out ranch life. It's more complicated than I expected." Elena's gaze fell on the photographs scattered across the table. Her expression changed immediately, becoming serious and focused. She picked up one of the clearer shots, studying it intently. "Where did you find these?" "By the old oak tree in the east pasture, yesterday afternoon. Do you recognize what made them?" She set the photo down carefully, her professional composure slipping slightly. "Rick, I need you to listen to me very carefully. These tracks aren't from any animal that should be in this area. They're not from any animal that should exist, period." "What do you mean?" "I mean you need to start taking your grandfather's letter seriously. All of it. Especially the parts that seem most ridiculous." She pointed to Rule 4. "When's the next new moon?" I checked my phone's weather app. 3 days. "Good. That gives us time to prepare." Elena moved to the window, scanning the property with practiced eyes. "Have you been following the other rules?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Most of them. I had some trouble with Rule 3 a few days ago." "The meat?" "Made me sick as a dog. Food poisoning, I guess." Elena's expression softened slightly. "It wasn't food poisoning, Rick. That meat was contaminated, not with bacteria, with something else." Before I could ask what she meant, she continued. "What about Rule 1? The 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. restriction. I went outside the first night. There was scratching on the walls and I heard things, but I've stayed inside since then." "Good, that's good." She pulled out her phone and made a quick call. "Mom, it's Elena. Can you ask Pete to put together a supply kit for Rick?" "The usual. He'll know what I mean." After hanging up, she turned back to me. "We're going into town. There are people you need to meet properly, and supplies you need to get." The drive to Cedar Hollow was quiet. Elena lost in thought while I tried to process what she'd told me. Contaminated meat that wasn't bacterial contamination. Tracks from animals that shouldn't exist. It sounded insane, but the evidence was literally sitting on my kitchen table. At the hardware store, Pete, a grizzled man in his 70s with knowing eyes, was waiting with a collection of items that would have seemed random a week ago. Bags of rock salt, silver wire, sage bundles, and several boxes of shotgun shells. "Rock salt loads," Pete explained, noting my confusion. "Your granddad was particular about those. Said lead just makes him angry." "Makes what angry?" Pete exchanged a look with Elena. "Son, there are things in this part of Texas that don't show up in any wildlife guide. Things that been here longer than the cattle, longer than the town. Your granddad learned to coexist with them. That's why his ranch thrived when others failed." "You're talking about the tracks." "Among other things." Pete loaded the supplies into Elena's truck. "Your granddad had an understanding with the local wildlife. Part of that understanding involved certain precautions, certain courtesies." At the diner, Maria greeted us with coffee and a worried expression. "Elena told me about the tracks. How are you holding up, mijo?" "Confused, mostly. Everyone keeps talking in riddles." "Not riddles," said a new voice. I turned to see Sheriff Martinez approaching our table. Practical advice disguised as small talk. We've learned to be careful about what we say directly. "Careful of what?" Martinez sat down, lowering his voice. "Cedar Hollow has been here for over a century. In all that time, we've never had a single unsolved disappearance. Never had livestock predation we couldn't account for. Never had the kind of problems that plague other rural communities." "You know why?" I shook my head. "Because we learned the rules. We learned what works and what doesn't. We learned that some things are better contained than confronted." Over lunch, they told me more. Doc Hernandez joined us, adding details that painted a picture I was still reluctant to accept. Cedar Hollow sat on a boundary of sorts, a place where something ancient and hungry had been trapped or contained generations ago. The town's founders had learned to manage the threat rather than eliminate it. "Eliminate it how?" I asked. "You can't," Martinez said simply. "It's part of the land now, part of the ecosystem. All we can do is maintain the barriers, follow the protocols, and hope it stays contained." "What exactly are we talking about?" The table fell silent. Finally, Doc Hernandez spoke. "In the old language, they called it Wendigo. But names have power, and some things are better left unnamed in casual conversation." The word hit me like cold water. I'd heard of Wendigos, Native American folklore about cannibalistic creatures born from desperation and hunger, but folklore was one thing. Sitting in a small-town diner discussing them as real threats was another. "You're serious." "Dead serious," Martinez confirmed. "Your grandfather was part of the containment network. Now that responsibility falls to you." That evening, Elena helped me salt the ground around the house and barn. We worked in silence, creating precise circles with the rock salt while the sun set behind the mesquite trees. The ritual felt ancient and important, even if I didn't fully understand it. "The salt creates a barrier," Elena explained as we finished. "Not physical, spiritual. It marks territory, sets boundaries, shows respect." "Respect for what?" "For something that was here first and isn't going anywhere." 2 days later, on day 9, everything changed. I was settling in for the evening, reading through some of my grandfather's ranch records, when I heard a knock at the front door. It was late, nearly 11 o'clock, and I wasn't expecting anyone. "Hello?" called a voice from outside. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I've got an injured horse down the road. Could you help me? I've got a truck, but I need another pair of hands." The voice sounded normal enough, a middle-aged man with a slight Texas drawl, the kind of neighbor who might reasonably ask for help with an emergency. But Rule 6 flashed through my mind. Never open the door after dark unless the visitor can recite the Lord's Prayer word for word. "Sure," I called back, my hand on the door handle. "Just give me a second." I paused, remembering Elena's warnings about taking the rules seriously. It seemed paranoid, but what could it hurt? "Before I open up, could you recite the Lord's Prayer? My grandfather was real religious, and he made me promise to ask anyone who visits after dark." Silence. Complete, total silence that stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Then, "What?" "The Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven. You know it, right?" Another long pause. When the voice came again, it was different, deeper, with an odd resonance that made my skin crawl. "Let me in. Just say the prayer first. Let me in." The voice was wrong now, unmistakably wrong, too deep with harmonic overtones that no human throat could produce. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering. Something heavy slammed against the door, rattling the frame. I lunged for my grandfather's shotgun, fumbling with the rock salt shells as another impact shook the house. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shape too tall and wrong to be human, moving with predatory grace around the house. The scratching started then, the same rhythmic sound I'd heard my first night, but louder and more aggressive. I called Elena, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Rick? What's wrong?" "Something's at the house. It tried to get me to open the door, but when I asked for the prayer, 'Stay inside. Lock every door and window. Don't go near the windows. We're coming.'" The assault on the house continued for hours. Scratching, impacts against the walls, and sounds that belonged in nightmares. Through the curtains, I glimpsed shadows moving in impossible ways, shapes that hurt to look at directly. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. As the first rays of sunlight touched the eastern pasture, the sounds stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise had been. I sat in the living room, shotgun across my knees, waiting. 3 trucks arrived at sunrise: Sheriff Martinez, Elena, and Maria, along with Father Mackenzie from the local church. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking the property perimeter before approaching the house. The evidence was unmistakable. Deep scratches scored the wooden siding, and strange tracks circled the house, the same tracks I'd found by the oak tree. "You did good," Martinez said, examining the front door. "Following Rule 6 probably saved your life." "What was it?" "Hungry," Elena said simply, "and testing boundaries." Inside, Father Mackenzie performed what he called a cleansing, but the prayers he used were older than any Catholic ritual I knew. When he finished, he placed his hand on my shoulder. "You're part of the community now, son. Really part of it. That thing wouldn't have tested you otherwise." Sheriff Martinez spread a map across my kitchen table, marking locations with red pins. "This is every ranch in the area. Your grandfather's place anchors the eastern boundary of our containment zone. That makes you a critical part of our defensive network." "Defensive against what, exactly?" Elena sat across from me, her expression grave. "Something that's been contained here for generations. Something that feeds on isolation, fear, and desperation. Your grandfather helped keep it contained. Now that job falls to you. Why here? Why this place?" "Old wounds in the land," Doc Hernandez said. "Places where the boundary between worlds is thin. Your ancestors chose this spot for the ranch because the land was cheap. Nobody else wanted it. They learned why the hard way, but they also learned how to survive." Martinez folded the map. "The containment network depends on cooperation. Every ranch owner, every family in town, we all play a part. Your grandfather was planning to teach you gradually, but his death accelerated the timeline." "What if I just left? Sold the place and went back to Dallas?" The question hung in the air like a stone dropped in still water. "You could try," Elena said finally, "but it knows you now. It's tested you, marked you. Distance might not be enough. Besides," Maria added gently, "where would you go? You said yourself you had nothing left in Dallas." She was right. The ranch wasn't just inheritance, it was refuge. My only refuge. "So what do I do?" "You learn," Martinez said. "You follow the rules. You become part of the network. And you help us keep the rest of the world safe from something it's not ready to understand." That afternoon, Elena stayed to help me repair the damage and reinforce the house's defenses. As we worked, I found myself studying her profile, noting the competent way she handled both veterinary equipment and supernatural countermeasures. "How long have you known?" I asked as we installed silver wire along the window frames. "All my life. I grew up here, remember? This is just part of living in Cedar Hollow." "Doesn't it bother you?" She paused in her work, considering the question. "Would it bother you to know there were bears in the woods? Or poisonous snakes in the grass? This is just another natural hazard to manage. Bears and snakes don't pretend to be injured neighbors." "No. But they're still dangerous if you don't respect them." Elena met my eyes. "The difference is this particular predator is intelligent. It adapts, it learns, it tests boundaries. That's why the rules exist. They're not superstition. They're survival protocols developed over generations." As evening approached, I realized I felt safer with Elena there, not just because of her knowledge of local supernatural threats, but because she represented connection to the community that was slowly accepting me. "Will you stay tonight?" I asked as we finished the repairs. "Planning on it. At least until we're sure last night's visit was just testing and not the start of something bigger." That night, as Elena dozed in the living room chair with her own shotgun across her lap, I lay in bed thinking about the choice ahead of me. I could continue fighting this new reality, continue viewing it as elaborate small-town madness. Or I could accept that some truths were stranger than anything I'd learned in engineering school. The tracks by the oak tree were real. The thing that had tried to trick me into opening the door was real. The coordinated community response was real. Cedar Hollow wasn't just a town, it was a fortress, and I was no longer just a desperate inheritor looking for refuge. I was a guardian, whether I wanted to be or not. The morning after the false neighbor incident, Elena and I stood in my kitchen drinking coffee and surveying the damage to the house. Deep scratches marred the wooden siding, and the silver wire we'd installed was twisted and torn in several places. "It's getting bolder," Elena said, running her fingers along one of the deeper gouges. "Usually it tests new arrivals more subtly. What's different about me? Maybe nothing. Or maybe it's just hungrier this season." She paused, studying my face. "Rick, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Have you been having dreams?" The question caught me off guard. Dreams? Vivid ones. About the ranch, about walking through the pastures at night. Sometimes there are lights. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. I had been having dreams. Strange, compelling dreams where I found myself walking through moonlit fields toward flickering lights in the distance. In the dreams, the lights seemed to call to me, promising answers to questions I didn't know how to ask. "How did you know?" Elena's expression grew grave. "Because that's how it starts. The dreams are invitations. It's trying to lure you out during the dangerous hours." Over the next day, Elena taught me more about the practical aspects of living with supernatural threats. We repaired the silver wire, reinforced the salt circles, and she showed me how to recognize the signs of increased creature activity. "See how the cattle cluster together in the center of the pasture?" she pointed out during our evening count. "When they avoid the fence lines, it means something's been testing the boundaries." Day 11 brought the first real test of my resolve. The dreams had been getting stronger, more vivid, and when I woke that morning, I could swear I smelled sage and dry grass from my dream walk. Elena had returned to her own place the previous evening, confident that the immediate threat had passed. I was wrong to let her go. Around 10 p.m., I was reading through more of my grandfather's journals when I saw them. Lights flickering in the east pasture, near the sacred oak tree. They danced and swayed like fireflies, but larger, more purposeful, beautiful in a way that made my chest tight with longing. Rule 7 echoed in my mind. If you see lights in the pasture at night, don't follow them. But the lights were so close to the oak tree, and what if something was wrong? What if cattle were in distress? I'd learned enough about ranching to know that livestock emergencies couldn't wait for dawn. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The night air was cool and still, carrying scents of sage and something else, something sweet and cloying that made my mouth water despite myself. The lights seemed closer now, just beyond the fence line, pulsing with an almost musical rhythm. I walked toward them, each step feeling natural and necessary. The fence, the salt circles, the boundaries Elena had shown me. They all seemed arbitrary now, unnecessary barriers between me and something wonderful waiting in the darkness. Time became fluid. I remember opening the gate, remember walking through tall grass that whispered against my legs, remember the lights growing brighter as they led me deeper into the pasture. But the details slipped away like water, leaving only the sensation of movement and the growing certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. The next clear memory was dawn light filtering through oak leaves above my head. I was lying at the base of the sacred oak, 2 miles from the house, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My clothes were torn, scratches covered my arms and face, and my boots were caked with mud despite the dry weather. But I was alive, and according to my phone, I'd lost nearly 8 hours. I stumbled back to the house, my body aching like I'd run a marathon. Elena's truck was in the driveway, and she met me at the door with relief and anger warring in her expression. Do you have any idea how worried I was? When I couldn't reach you this morning and saw the front door standing open. The lights, I managed, collapsing into a kitchen chair. I followed the lights. Her anger evaporated, replaced by clinical concern. Show me your arms. The scratches were deeper than I'd realized, some still bleeding. Elena cleaned and bandaged them with practiced efficiency while I explained what I could remember. You're lucky, she said finally. The oak tree is sacred ground, neutral territory. It's probably what saved you. Saved me from what? From becoming one of the missing. Elena's voice was quiet but firm. People who follow the lights don't usually come back, Rick. When they do, they're changed. She stayed with me through the day, monitoring my condition and helping me piece together what had happened. The time loss was complete, 8 hours gone without a trace. But gradually, as the day wore on, fragments returned. Images of walking through landscape that shifted and changed when I wasn't looking directly at it. Sounds that didn't match their sources. And always, the sense of being led towards something both terrible and wonderful. It was testing you, Elena explained as she helped me to bed that evening. Seeing how far you'd go, how much control it could exert. The fact that you ended up at the oak tree instead of somewhere else suggests you retained enough awareness to seek sanctuary. That night, she slept in the chair beside my bed, her shotgun within easy reach. I woke several times to find her watching the windows, alert and tense. The experience had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. The next morning brought Sheriff Martinez and Doc Hernandez for what Elena called a wellness check. Their examination was thorough, testing my reflexes, checking my pupils, asking pointed questions about my memories and mental state. Clean bill of health, Doc Hernandez announced finally. But you'll need to be more careful. The lights, they're harder to resist each time you encounter them. There'll be a next time? Oh, yes, Martinez said grimly. It knows you now, really knows you. The testing phase is over. Elena took leave from her veterinary practice to stay with me for the next few days, claiming she needed to monitor my recovery. But I suspected it was more than medical concern keeping her close. We'd crossed some invisible threshold during my night of lost time, moved from professional cooperation to something deeper and more personal. I keep thinking about what might have happened, she admitted on day 13, as we worked together to repair fence damage I didn't remember causing. If you hadn't found the oak tree, but I did find it, this time. She paused in her work, meeting my eyes. Rick, I need you to understand something. This isn't a game or a test of courage. People die out here. Good people who thought they could handle things on their own. Are you saying I can't? I'm saying you don't have to. That's what the community is for. Mutual protection. Nobody faces this alone. That afternoon, Elena introduced me to the broader network of ranchers and townspeople who formed Cedar Hollow's supernatural defense system. We visited the Hendersons, whose ranch bordered mine to the south, and the Kowalskis, whose family had been fighting the same threat for 3 generations. Each stop taught me something new. Tom Henderson showed me how to read sign in ways that went beyond normal tracking, disturbances in the natural order that indicated supernatural activity. Sarah Kowalski demonstrated proper construction of protective barriers using materials that looked mundane but carried deeper significance. Silver wire isn't just superstition, she explained, showing me the technique for weaving blessed threads through regular fencing. It creates resonance patterns that interfere with certain frequencies. Frequencies? Think of it as spiritual white noise. Makes it harder for unwanted things to focus on what's inside the barrier. By day 15, I'd learned enough to begin contributing to the community's defensive efforts rather than just receiving protection. My engineering background proved surprisingly useful. I could calculate optimal spacing for protective elements and design barriers that looked like normal ranch infrastructure to outsiders. Elena and I worked side by side, our partnership deepening naturally through shared purpose. There were moments, hands touching as we passed tools, quiet conversations during breaks, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. That made me realize my feelings for her went far beyond gratitude for her protection. But it was day 16 that changed everything. I woke to the sound of vehicles in my driveway, Sheriff Martinez's truck, followed by Tom Henderson's pickup and Sarah Kowalski's SUV. The grim expressions on their faces told me this wasn't a social call. Multiple incidents last night, Martinez reported as we gathered in my kitchen. 3 ranches hit simultaneously. No missing cattle, but significant property damage and signs of probing behavior. Elena spread a map across the table, marking the affected properties with red pins. It's coordinating, testing multiple weak points in our defensive perimeter. Testing for what? A way through, Tom Henderson said. Usually it picks off isolated targets, single ranchers who let their guard down, newcomers who don't know the rules. But this is different, more organized. Sarah Kowalski's phone buzzed with a text message. Her face went pale as she read it. Another incident. The Williams place, just outside town. That's 4 properties in 12 hours. The room fell silent. Finally, Martinez spoke. It's not hunting individuals anymore. It's hunting the community. Elena's hand found mine under the table, her grip tight with worry. Why now? What's changed? Could be cyclical, Doc Hernandez suggested when he arrived an hour later. Some years the hungry season is worse than others. Or ... Or what? He looked directly at me. Or it sees Rick as a threat. His grandfather was one of the anchors of our defensive network. Maybe it's trying to break the containment before Rick can fully take on that role. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. These people, Elena, Martinez, the ranchers and townspeople who'd accepted me into their community, they were all at risk because I'd inherited more than just land. What do? We coordinate, Martinez said. Full community response. Every ranch, every family. This ends now, one way or another. Elena squeezed my hand. Together. That evening, the entire community gathered at the church. Father Mackenzie led us in prayers that sounded older than Christianity, while Pete from the hardware store distributed specialized equipment to every family. Shotgun shells, silver wire, blessed salt, and sage bundles. The tools of a war most of the world didn't know was being fought. Sheriff Martinez outlined the plan. Each ranch would be defended by multiple families working in shifts. Communication networks would ensure rapid response to any incident. And if the containment failed entirely, evacuation protocols would protect the children and elderly. This isn't about heroism, Martinez emphasized. This is about survival. We follow the plan, we watch each other's backs, and we don't take unnecessary risks. But as I looked around the room at the faces of people I'd come to care about, Elena with her quiet strength, Maria with her maternal protectiveness, Pete with his gruff wisdom, I realized something had changed in me. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were family, and I'd do whatever it took to protect them. Elena rode back to the ranch with me, our conversation quiet and serious as we discussed the defensive preparations. The romantic tension that had been building between us felt secondary now to the immediate threat, but it was still there, adding urgency to every shared glance. "Rick," she said as we pulled into the ranch driveway, "whatever happens tomorrow night, I want you to know." "I know," I interrupted gently. "I feel it too." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all day. "Good, because when this is over, we're going to have a long conversation about the future." "The future?" "Your future here. Our future." Cedar Hollow needs a veterinarian who understands both sides of the job, natural and supernatural. I've been thinking about expanding my practice, maybe bringing in a partner with complementary skills. Engineering and supernatural containment? Strange combination, but it seems to work. As we prepared the ranch for what Martinez had called the final confrontation, I realized Elena was right. My old life in Dallas felt like a dream now, insubstantial and distant. This place, these people, this strange new reality of ranching and supernatural defense, this was home. Tomorrow would bring the test that would determine whether Cedar Hollow's century-long containment could hold for another generation. But tonight, with Elena beside me and the community's collective strength at my back, I felt ready for whatever came. The hungry season was reaching its peak, but I was no longer the desperate, isolated man who'd arrived here 3 weeks ago. I was part of something larger now, a guardian, a community member, a man with roots in Texas soil and reasons to fight for the future. And for the first time since inheriting my grandfather's ranch, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Dawn on day 18 brought no relief from the tension that had gripped Cedar Hollow since the coordinated attacks began. I woke to find Elena already up, checking the silver wire installations around the house with methodical precision. Her movements were efficient but tense, like a soldier preparing for battle. "How bad is it?" I asked, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. "Tom Henderson lost 12 head of cattle last night. No blood, no tracks, no signs of struggle. They just vanished." She accepted the coffee gratefully, her hands trembling slightly. Sarah Kowalski's barn doors were found wide open, but her security cameras show nothing. It's like the locks opened themselves. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. It's adapting to our defenses. Faster than we expected. Martinez called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. We're implementing the final protocols. The final protocols, a phrase that had haunted community discussions for the past week. I'd learned enough about Cedar Hollow's history to know that these protocols had never been used in living memory. They represented the last resort, the nuclear option of supernatural containment. By noon, trucks were arriving at the ranch from all directions. The entire community had mobilized. Ranchers, townspeople, even families with children who'd been sent to relatives in Austin for safety. Everyone had a role to play in what Sheriff Martinez grimly called the last stand. Elena and I worked side by side, coordinating defensive positions with the other ranch owners. My engineering background proved invaluable as we calculated sight lines, communication ranges, and fallback positions. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Hollow, I felt truly useful, not just protected, but protecting. "Rick," Elena said as we secured the final perimeter markers, "whatever happens tonight, I want you to know you've become everything I hoped you would be." "What do you mean?" "A true member of this community. Someone who understands that survival isn't about individual strength. It's about collective commitment." She paused, studying my face. "Your grandfather would be proud." The words hit me harder than I expected. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a desperate stranger with no connections and no future. Now, I was part of something larger, something that mattered. As evening approached, the supernatural activity intensified. Cattle across the valley huddled in tight groups, their eyes rolling white with fear. The air itself seemed to thicken, carrying sounds that didn't belong, whispers in languages I didn't recognize, the scratch of claws on wood, the distant howl of something that wasn't quite wolf. Father Mackenzie arrived at sunset, carrying a leather satchel filled with items that predated his Catholic training. Salt from the Dead Sea, silver crosses blessed by practitioners of faiths older than Christianity, and sage bundles harvested under specific moon phases. He moved from house to house, reinforcing spiritual defenses with rituals that felt ancient and powerful. "This is bigger than we thought," he told Elena and me as he completed his preparations at the ranch. The containment isn't just weakening, it's being systematically dismantled. Something is coordinating this assault. The Wendigo? Or something using it. There are hierarchies in the supernatural world, layers of power we don't fully understand. What we've been dealing with might just be the foot soldier. The first attack came at midnight. I was monitoring the eastern perimeter when my radio crackled with Sheriff Martinez's voice. "All units, we have activity at the Henderson place. Multiple contacts, coordinated approach." Through my night vision scope, I could see lights moving across Tom Henderson's property. Not the dancing lights I'd followed earlier, but harsh, purposeful illumination that hurt to look at directly. The creatures casting those lights moved with military precision, testing defenses and probing for weaknesses. "Contact at the Morrison Ranch," I reported as shapes emerged from the tree line. 3. No. 5 entities approaching from the east. This was different from my previous encounters. These weren't random tests or individual hunting expeditions. This was warfare. I followed every rule my grandfather had laid out, treating his letter like a battlefield manual. The shotgun loaded with rock salt shells stayed within arm's reach. The salt circles held firm, creating barriers the creatures couldn't cross. When something scratched at the walls, I didn't investigate. I reinforced my position and waited. Rule 6 proved crucial when one of the entities approached the front door around 2 a.m., speaking in Elena's voice. "Rick, it's me. I'm hurt. Please open the door." "Recite the Lord's Prayer," I called back, my finger on the shotgun's trigger. The voice changed, becoming something between a growl and a laugh. "Let me in, Guardian." "Not tonight." The assault on the house intensified, but the defenses held. Every rule, every precaution, every community-taught lesson came together in a symphony of protection. I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. Elena's voice crackled through the radio. "Rick, we've got a problem. The creature at your location. It's not trying to get in. It's keeping you pinned down while others hit the Henderson place." The realization struck me like cold water. This wasn't about individual ranches anymore. The creatures were using coordinated tactics, sacrificing direct attacks for strategic advantage. While I was focused on defending my property, they were systematically dismantling other parts of the containment network. "I'm moving to support Henderson," I radioed back. "Negative. Hold your position. We've got this." But I could hear the strain in her voice, the exhaustion that came from hours of supernatural combat. The community was stretched thin, and people were going to get hurt if we didn't adapt. That's when I remembered something Doc Hernandez had said. "Your grandfather was one of the anchors of our defensive network. Not just a participant, an anchor, a central point that other defenses relied on for stability." I made a decision that would have terrified me 3 weeks ago. Instead of hiding behind my defenses, I used them as a base of operations. The ranch became command central, with Elena and me coordinating community-wide responses while maintaining our own protective perimeter. My engineering skills proved invaluable in calculating optimal defensive positions and predicting creature movement patterns. "Tom, adjust your eastern fence line by 30 degrees, I radioed to Henderson. "The creature approaching from your blind spot will hit the modified silver wire barrier." "Sarah, your barn doors are opening because they're creating electromagnetic interference. Switch to the backup locking system." "Martinez, the coordinated attack is designed to drive us toward the town center. Don't let them funnel us into a kill zone." For the first time, I wasn't just following someone else's plan. I was helping to create it. The battle continued through the night, with victories and setbacks on both sides. We lost some cattle, and several buildings suffered damage, but the core containment held. More importantly, no people were hurt. The community's collective knowledge and coordinated response proved stronger than individual supernatural power. Dawn came slowly, bringing with it the kind of exhausted relief that follows successful crisis management. As the supernatural activity faded with the growing light, I found myself surrounded by neighbors who no longer looked at me as an outsider. "Good work tonight," Sheriff Martinez said, shaking my hand with genuine respect. "You've earned your place here." Elena appeared at my side, her face streaked with dust and fatigue, but her eyes bright with pride. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm home," I answered, surprised by the truth of it. The aftermath took most of day 21 to manage: property damage assessments, livestock counts, and debriefings with every family involved. But underneath the administrative work, I could feel something fundamental had changed. The community had been tested and proven strong. The containment system had held. More importantly, I'd found my role within it. That evening, as Elena and I sat on the ranch house porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, she outlined her vision for the future. "Cedar Hollow needs a veterinarian who understands both sides of the job," she said, her hand finding mine. "Someone who can treat ordinary livestock problems and supernatural injuries with equal skill. I've been thinking about expanding my practice." "Expanding how?" "Partnership. Your engineering background combined with my veterinary training could revolutionize how we handle supernatural threats. Not just reactive containment, but proactive management." The idea excited me more than I expected. "What would that look like?" "Better defensive systems, early warning networks, maybe even research into the supernatural ecosystem. Understanding how these creatures fit into the larger environment instead of just fighting them." I squeezed her hand. "I like the sound of that." "Good, because I was hoping you'd say yes to more than just the business partnership." The question hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. After everything we'd been through together, the next step felt natural and inevitable. "Yes," I said simply, "to all of it." 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where I'd first encountered the false neighbor, watching a nervous young woman read her grandfather's letter for the first time. Jennifer Walsh had inherited the old Murphy place on the western edge of town, complete with her own set of supernatural protection rules. "This is insane," she said, looking up from the handwritten instructions. "Salt circles? Blessed ammunition? What kind of place is this?" "The kind of place where people take care of each other," I replied, remembering my own first reaction to my grandfather's letter. "Where traditions exist for good reasons, even if they seem strange at first." Elena joined us, carrying the medical kit she'd assembled specifically for helping new arrivals adjust to Cedar Hollow's unique requirements. Her veterinary practice had indeed expanded, with me as a full partner specializing in supernatural defense systems. "The most important thing to remember," Elena told Jennifer, "is that you're not facing this alone. The community has been dealing with these challenges for generations. We know what works." "And what doesn't," I added with a smile. "Trust me, I learned that the hard way." Jennifer looked between us, seeing the confidence that came from successful integration into something larger than ourselves. "So this gets easier?" "It gets familiar," I corrected, "and familiar is almost the same as easy." That evening, Elena and I conducted our routine property check, a habit that had become as natural as breathing. The cattle were healthy, the defenses were strong, and the community was secure. My grandfather's ranch was thriving under my care, but more importantly, I was thriving as part of Cedar Hollow's protective network. "Any regrets?" Elena asked as we completed the circuit. "About leaving Dallas? About the inheritance? About staying?" I shook my head. None whatsoever. "Even about the supernatural aspects?" I considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, I would have called anyone who claimed to fight monsters a lunatic. Now I understood that some battles were worth fighting, some responsibilities were worth accepting, and some communities were worth protecting. "Especially about the supernatural aspects," I said finally. "It's what makes this place special. What makes us special." Elena smiled, the expression lighting up her face in the moonlight. "I love it when you say us." "Get used to it," I replied, pulling her close. "I'm not going anywhere." As we walked back toward the house, I caught sight of the sacred oak tree in the distance, its ancient branches silhouetted against the star-filled Texas sky. It had been my salvation during those first terrifying encounters. a sanctuary when I was lost and afraid. Now it stood as a symbol of continuity, of the deep roots that connected past and present, individual and community, human and supernatural. I'd found my place in that continuum, earned my belonging through trial and commitment. The ranch was mine now, truly mine in a way that had nothing to do with legal documents or inheritance laws. I'd claimed it through understanding, defended it through courage, and integrated it into something larger through community cooperation. Cedar Hollow had its guardian, Elena had her partner, and I had found the home I'd been searching for without knowing it existed. The hungry season would return, as it always did, but when it came, we'd be ready. Together.